Morning, everyone. Our modern testimonies are from three sources spanning over 600 years. First, Julian of Norwich, who wrote, "Nature and grace are in harmony with each other. For grace is God, as nature is God. God is two in manner of working, and one in love. Neither nature nor grace works without the other. They may never be separated. The fullness of joy is to behold God in everything." Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote, "Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit around and pluck blackberries." Finally, these words of Thomas Berry: "We will not save what we do not love. But it is also true that we will neither love nor save what we do not experience as sacred." Thus endeth our modern testimonials.
Thanks, Bruce. This last week, we put out a question of the week, which is, where in nature have you experienced God? And we had several responses that I put together in a compilation as part of our children's moment. And we're really just going to have a children's moment and a conversation with the children afterwards. And also we'll invite you older folks to the conversation as well. But let's take a look at how our members responded to that question.
I'm Frank Baldwin in Portland, Oregon. I've always felt very close to God in nature, especially in the high mountains of the West, California and Oregon. The last congregation I pastored in California before retiring had an annual tradition of going with 50 or 60 members of that church of all ages to Yosemite Valley for a long weekend of camping together. Wonderful time to be there, dogwoods in bloom, waterfalls at their fullest, sunlight on the high cliffs. No wonder famously agnostic John Muir called it his cathedral. Certainly felt like being in one as far as we were concerned. Best part was Sunday morning. Worship in front of the Merced River with Yosemite Falls coming down the cliffs on the far side of the valley in front of us. I used to baptize people in that river, the River of Mercy. None of us ever felt closer to God than in those moments.
Yes, this is Sandy Hill, and I'm talking about Yosemite. Every year our church went for a weekend in Yosemite, and it was wonderful. It is such a sacred place, and it's just overwhelming. Even coming in the car and then bicycling and walking the trails and getting up in the morning and walking out, and there's Yosemite Falls. It was absolutely wonderful experience. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Gary Vaughn. Julian wrote, "The fullness of joy is to behold God in everything, for God is the same thing as nature." So I was looking in my backyard and suddenly I saw God. Now I knew you weren't going to believe me, and so I videotaped it. And before God disappeared, she smiled at me and sent me a silent blessing. Take a look.
Well, do we have children present this morning? I sent this out to families earlier, and it's because I wanted to give the children a moment to think about that before being put on the spot. But I just wanted to do if you have any experiences yourself of seeing God or something that you consider to be especially meaningful in nature. I invite you to unmute and share it with us. Yeah. Go ahead.
There we go. Hey, Thomas.
Okay.
Say hello.
Hello. Do you know I've experienced God in nature when I saw at least 10 rainbows in one trip.
And when was
10
that?
rainbows.
When was that?
It was when we it was when we were driving to the ski place and driving home, but we saw the most when we were driving home.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of rainbows. Was that on your ski trip from yesterday?
In fact, one day we went right next to the end of a rainbow and I saw the leprechaun's gold.
You did? Wow. I've never seen that pot of gold. That's amazing. I hope you'll share it with us.
Goodbye. Well, I mean, not goodbye, but like, it was also, I also experienced the trees. There was a whole bunch of trees, and I like those kinds of stuff.
Yeah, how do they make you feel?
They make me feel pretty happy because it makes me feel just, happy because I like to see God.
I like that. That's beautiful, Thomas. Thank you for sharing that. Looks like Logan, are you?
You're welcome.
Hi. Do you have something to share?
Yeah, I feel God at my grandparents' house in Metolius Meadows.
Oh, wow. That's over by, is that by Detroit?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you see out in those meadows?
Well, there's lots of like deer, and then there's like lots of like just like deers and like birds and stuff like that.
Wow. And how does that make you feel when you see those things?
Well, I like to be in nature.
Yeah.
It's like
great.
calm.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Logan. Are there others who want to share where you found God in nature?
George can't talk, so I'm going to do it.
Okay.
When we first came to look at this house, George was 6, yeah. And we drove up to the house and there was a tree. I hadn't seen the house yet. And it was before the days of video when you could look inside the house. So I really hadn't seen the house. But George, I saw this tree and George got out of the car and went to the tree. And it was like, I knew the tree was telling me that this was going to be fine. I hadn't even seen the house, but I made my decision based on that tree and the way I felt about the tree.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's amazing how, I agree. I mean, amazing how you can kind of have a question on the mind and enter some part of nature more consciously, mindfully, and come out on the other side with the answer to your question. You don't even know how that happened. Yeah, great. Anybody else want to share a word about where you found God in nature?
I wish I had a picture to share, but when I walked down to the ocean when I first arrived there and I'm standing on the beach, the fresh sea air and the roar of the ocean, I just feel like I'm breathing in God. And if I get to stay and watch the sunset, I see God. I see God in action. It's so glorious.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ann. Yeah. You know, if you scratch the surface beneath anyone, at least in my experience, even people who say they don't identify as particularly spiritual, if they've had any kind of spiritual experience at all, oftentimes, or most often, it has been mediated through some experience of nature. It's no wonder why people will say, I don't go to church on Sunday because I feel closer to God in the mountains or by the ocean or what have you. It's like, it's like, well, of course, you can find God more readily actually in nature. It's actually the harder thing is to find God in church sometimes, but that's part of it too. It's like to find God not just simply in that which uplifts our spirits, but also in times when we're challenged, to find God in other people, even people who make us uncomfortable. And so it's you do a little heavier lifting to find God when you're not in a purely natural setting. It's curious that Julian says not simply that we can find God in nature. She actually says that nature and God are one thing, and that's that's a little more challenging statement. That goes a little bit further than just simply finding God in nature. It's actually equating God with nature, and I wonder if what do you think about that statement? Anybody you want to unmute and invite you to share your own thoughts about that nature is God.
I would agree.
Yeah. So how does that work for you then? If nature is God, how do you relate to God?
I don't know. I had never thought about it until you brought it up. But I'm not too much into God and religion kinds of things. But I can understand how, nature is God, because whoever, whatever created it. I mean, it's there for us all to experience. And of course, we've experienced the wrath of God this last week or two. So, and I guess we're going to experience some more, because according to Oregon Live, the Pineapple Express is coming today. So who knows?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I would just.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Oop, I cut somebody off. Oh, okay.
Well, can I say something?
Please, yeah.
I was gonna say that the question made me really think about all of the things in nature that I love to see, and as I was thinking about that, I was like, well, what is the connection between all of these things? And the connection was wonder. And so then I came to the viewpoint that God and wonder are synonymous. And so when I look at nature, I see wonder, which I view as unanimous with God.
I love that. I think there's something to that, Christina. Oftentimes there are feelings we get that are consistently seem to be track with what people consider to be experiences of the divine. And one of those, in fact, when the Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom, that they don't mean the fear like terror of God. The closer to the Hebrew is wonderstruck reverence. So you're deep into the Hebrew thought there. Wonderstruck reverence. Yeah. So go ahead.
What about if God is nature and nature is God, then when we harm nature, are we harming God?
Good question. Anybody want to take that one on? We harm nature, are we harming God?
In a way, if you believe in God, yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Well, at least we're not in harmony with God if we're harming nature.
Yeah, good point.
We are setting ourselves apart in some way, and that, I think, is the error.
Yeah. Let's get into that kind of set apart thing, the relationship between God and us and nature. Of course, we're part of nature, right? So when we say God is in nature, we'd also have to include us in that equation. But this has been debated and talked about for centuries, as one might imagine. And I'm going to throw up three primary ways that people have seen the relationship between God and nature here on the screen. In theism, pantheism, and panentheism. And if I were to illustrate what those are, theism would see God here, and then nature is here. Pardon my messy handwriting, but they're separate. God is kind of, that's that kind of classic idea of God being up in the heavens someplace, sitting on a throne, and therefore when we talk about God's interaction with us in nature, we have to talk about God, those experiences as being supernatural. That is, God breaks into the natural order of things and messes with it in some way. So that is a classic theistic approach. Now, pantheism sees it all as one. You got God equals nature. They're all the same thing. And that's where apparently, that's at least from, you might, when Julian says God is nature, you might think about that. But I don't think that actually that is where Julian was going. Oftentimes, like with pantheism, then, the raccoon that Gary saw would also have the fullness of God, like would have all of the consciousness of the universe in the single raccoon. Maybe, but I've never had a good enough conversation with a raccoon to know. Oops, I just shut off my iPad there. Uh-oh. Oh, okay, there we go. To know whether the raccoon sees and hears and knows all. But panentheism, I think this is closer to where Julian is. Panentheism would see this big circle as God, and then nature is within God. So actually God is greater than the universe. The universe is a part of God, and God is riddled throughout it because it's actually inside of God. It's all part of God. So one would say the God is in the raccoon, but the raccoon does not define all of what God is, just as all of nature actually doesn't define all of what God is. So that's panentheism. I think that's where Julian is getting at, is that seeing God in all things. Another way to illustrate that is with a funnel. I like to think of it like this as well. So if you think about the funnel being like the totality, like the top of the funnel is God, and that's like ultimate consciousness of everything, all things at all times, in all places. And then as you go down that funnel, it's a reduction in consciousness. So it's less and less and less consciously aware of things. Maybe if there are such things as angels and divine beings, maybe that would be on that scale. But then you get down to the very tip of that funnel, and now you're at such a low level of consciousness that you're actually not even, it's materialized and gotten locked into material reality. So it's at the lowest state of all consciousness compared to the consciousness of the entire universe. But that's kind of where we are. So you got kind of the ultimate consciousness up above, seeing all things and all things and all people and all creations, and then down below you've got such a low level of consciousness that it's actually gotten materialized, incarnated, so to speak. And that's where we and nature are. There's still another way to look at this, which would be with the Mobius strip. Kids, do you know what the Mobius strip is? Or anybody know what a Mobius strip is? I'll show you. So if I have a strip of paper, and I'm going to put God on one side, and then nature is on the other side, right? And now a regular circle, you just join them together, and now you'd have like God is on one side and nature's on the other, and neither the two shall meet kind of thing. That would almost be a theistic way of seeing things. But if you just put a slight twist in the paper, now it forms this kind of infinity figure eight thing, and there isn't no place in it where you can say it's purely God or purely nature. It's all just, it is what it is. And to me, that Mobius strip represents panentheism, most clearly. Though you don't, it's kind of beyond this either or. It's a non-dual way of looking at God. It's seeing God in all things, and recognizing that God is in us as well. So we God, God defines us, but we don't define God. So we are God, but we're at such a low level of consciousness that we can actually go against ourselves. While God, we don't define God then, but God does define us. Well, I want to turn to one other way. We had that. Who was it? Margaret, who asked, could we harm God? If we harm nature? And I think that's a really interesting question. One I want to kind of end this part of the reflection with to ponder. I want to throw up an image on a screen. This is a picture of a leafcutter ant. These are amazing. They are in the jungles, like in New Guinea, and the leafcutter ants, they can actually take down an entire tree worth of vegetation in just 24 hours using their mandibules there, and they don't use the leaves for food. They bring the leaves just by the millions into their nests that are underground, and the nests can even underground could be as deep as 8 meters, I'm told. And they bring them into the nests, and the object is to make the leaves create a fungus, a special kind of fungus that grows on the leaves, which then they feed to their larvae. And it's just this interesting, very delicate balance where they're intentionally creating a certain kind of fungus and then managing it in a clean way to keep out bacteria from destroying the fungus. And then they feed that fungus that grows to their larvae. But every once in a while, some other kind of fungus spore creeps in, and it can affect an ant. And it will take control of the ant's actions. It'll start acting weird, and the ant is compelled to climb upwards into the tree, and then keep climbing until it gets onto a branch, and it's just it goes and it locks its mandibules on the branch in like a death grip, and it's completely outside of the control of the ant to do this, and so it bites down and it tethers itself to this branch several meters above the ground, and then the craziest thing happens once it's attached there. This other kind of fungus starts popping out of its body. This parasitic fungus called cordyceps. It just erupts from the body, and eventually this little stem comes shooting out the ant's head and develops a little sac of spores there, which then sprouts and from the ant's head, and then spreads. And so this fungus can actually spread into the jungle because it's up high in the air. It can fall in many places and then get into other animals of the forest that are also affected by the same fungus. There's a beetle with this fungus in it. And there's another animal, kind of beetle with this fungus in it. And scientists believe that this is actually, even though it's not so good for the animals that it controls, scientists believe that this is a way that nature uses to thin out populations that are getting overcrowded. Like those ants can just take down vegetation. So much vegetation would be bad for the trees. Or other animals, when they get overpopulated, this fungus then, as much as it can be bad because it kills a lot of animals, also thins those things out. So one question would be, I think, if we are, if this is also God, if God is, just as much as God can make us feel happy and loved and warm and fuzzy, God is also acting in these things that can be quite horrific and at least have horrific effects on that which it contain, is directly affected, even though ultimately it serves a good purpose. What happens if we are affecting nature in such a way that nature itself is under threat. Could nature be responding to us right now through global warming and wildfires and so forth? Could it even to work to kind of, in a sense, warn us at least, or thin us out at best? Julian said that she grew up during the plague, and her entire life was spent during the Black Death, and it circled back 4 times during her time, and it was way more deadly than the one that we're facing. It wiped out 40 to 60% of the population that what it affected. But if we are going affecting climate so much that we are going to pass that magical mark that where you could literally reduce your carbon emissions to 0 and the Earth would continue to warm because you've melted ice sheets under which huge deposits of methane gas are, and you melted tundra, which also contain greenhouse gases. If we are not getting our act together and are going to actually pass that point, and a divine being or a consciousness is aware of this, and this consciousness is loving, as Julian asserts, could even a pandemic be the kindest, gentlest way to thin out the population? I mean, there's kind of 2 ways you can thin out population, reduce the carbon footprint to avoid that. One would be through a pandemic, and the other would be through global violence. But global violence, of course, always results in decades and generations of animosity and continued conflict and so forth, where a pandemic doesn't do that. It's terrible for the population, but it doesn't leave that lingering memory of warfare. So after a generation or 2, then you're back to a healthy society. I'm not claiming that God sent the pandemic to us, by the way. I'm not, but it does make me think about, I think we caused the pandemic and nature responds. And hopefully this one is just a warning sign. It's mild compared to what could happen, but it does make me wonder if the pandemic is also God's way of waking us up to pay attention to science, pay attention to the way the Earth responds, lest we need to be thinned out a bit. Well, on that happy note, let's sing. Let's listen to the anthem.
Where the clock stops, where it's now. I want to be with the friends around me who have found me, who show me how. I want to sing to the early morning, see the sunlight melt the snow, and oh, I want to grow. To wake to the living spirit here inside me where it lies. I want to listen till I can hear it, let it guide me and realize that I can go with the flow unending, that is blending, that is real. And from cities, far from fear. I want to walk to the growing garden, to the tables, to the deer, and to be one with the river flowing, breezes blowing, sky above. And oh, I want to
Before reading our ancient testimony this morning, I wanted to make sure everybody knows that it refers to the age of the text, not the liturgists. Today's ancient testimony is from Job chapter 12, verses 7 through 10 in the Convergence Bible. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds of the air, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In her hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all humankind.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, you think about it, we're the only ones, as far as I can tell anyway, in nature that can actually go against who we are. I mean, if you see a kingfisher looking for prey, it's not wringing its hand saying, doggone it, I gotta get soaking wet every time I want to eat something. I wish I could be a rat or something else. Nature just is. It doesn't wish it was, a kingfisher doesn't wish it was a different kind of animal. It doesn't subvert how it was created. We're the only ones, as far as I can tell, who do that. In that sense, nature could be said to always be conforming to the will of the Creator. It always acts as it was created to act. And so if you have material beings that are created out of love by a loving Creator who always ever act according to how they are created, then you can see, to me, it helps be reminded about how close the connection is between God and nature. And when we are harming nature, nature may have some mechanisms to thin itself out, and those I think serve as really, to me, a profound warning. To me, the pandemic gets me thinking about the warning signal, like we better get our acts together fast. This is a kind and gentle way, even though so many people, there's been so much tragedy and death, just like with the fungus infecting ants. It's probably about the kindest, gentlest way of waking us up to the larger issue that we are causing to the planet, and hopefully we can do that. But also, during times of change, there's another way of seeing this in a little more optimistic or friendlier light, that when we are in the process of transformation as a society, it's always historically been followed by periods of upheaval, like profound upheaval. And in nature, we see an interesting phenomenon in the chrysalis of a butterfly that's emerging into a butterfly. An interesting phenomenon as that the caterpillar first kind of makes its chrysalis and then basically disintegrates into ooze, and these cells that emerge called imaginal cells that are attacked by the body's natural immune system. And I think there's a lesson here for what we may be going through here as a society. Let me just play you a clip about imaginal cells.
Around the world, people are waking up. They know we need change. and not just at the edges. We need to change our systems, not just our straws. But the question remains, how does change happen? In the face of these mounting crises, it can feel hopeless, but it shouldn't. Because there is a blueprint for change, buried deep in nature. It's a story of transformation, encoded at the deepest level of being, the imaginal cell. A cell that contains within it a vision of something new, of something better. The caterpillar, while alive, consumes. But this cannot go on forever. Everything has an end. Everything has a tipping point. All that is left is decay. But from this place of darkness, something new can be born. At first, the caterpillar fights this new presence,
What we want is more learning in schools and less activism.
seeing it as a threat, clinging to its old form. But the imaginal cells persist in spite of this. They begin to emit a common frequency. They cluster, they form collectives, until eventually they reach a critical mass. They can no longer be opposed. In time, the old yields to the new, and something beautiful emerges. So know this, the future is not foreclosed. Alternative worlds are possible. A world where hope matters more than despair. A world where care matters more than profit. A world where solidarity matters more than self-interest. Change can happen, and change is coming. Are you in?
So there's the other side of it. Nature in a perfectly organic way could, if we are moving towards the brink of a civilizational collapse, could help by wiping us out like the fungus does. But it also could go the other way through transforming, us being transformed. Are there people in the world who, in a sense, act like imaginal cells? And could a lot of the conflict and turmoil we're experiencing be because the way things are, are attacking those imaginal cells, like that happens in a caterpillar's body. The immune system gets triggered and say, this isn't how it's been, and attacks it. And could we be in the process of being transformed? And that's causing the turmoil, and being transformed into a way that can turn us back from that brink. Well, in our congregation, I know we have at least one imaginal cell. We've already heard a word or two from her, but I'm going to invite her at this time to kind of come forward, Christina Helms. And Christina was talking with me the other day about an idea she had for our church, and I wanted to invite her to share that this morning, just to kind of get us thinking about imaginal cells and how we might imagine ourselves in the future. Christina, before we begin on your idea, though, I just wanted you to just share a little bit of your experience. I know that you and your family have a profound commitment to getting out in nature regularly, and you have been all over the world doing what?
Doing scuba diving.
Scuba diving, wow. And where have you been, and what do you have an experience that maybe you've had scuba diving that kind of motivates you to do more?
Yes. There was I have 87 dives to choose from, but Bonaire is an island 75 miles off the coast of Venezuela, and it has like pristine waters. It's the funnest location to scuba dive in. And one of my favorite dives was an ostracod night dive. Ostracods are little worm-like creatures that only come out around a full moon, and they have bioluminescence. So the night dive was where we all got in the water at night, and we turned off our flashlights, And then we were just like floating in a star field because all of these ostracods were all over us, all around us, and they were just bioluminescing, and it was beautiful.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like a God experience to me right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you approached me the other day with just an idea that you've been thinking about in terms of the environment and your own concerns about the environment, and an idea that you had about that you suggested maybe we could think about as a church. You want to share that with the congregation?
Sure. So I've had this idea for a while now, but I would really like to equip our church with solar panels, either on the children's theater or the annex. And then this would then reduce our utility bills and produce green energy. And the bigger picture here is once we do it, then we can talk to all the church congregations around the park blocks and get them to, encourage them to do it. And then we would have a congregate of people to help fund other buildings downtown to install solar panels. So for instance, a lot of church members live at Twilliger Plaza. So we could help them install solar panels and then fund one building at a time until most of downtown is producing green energy.
That's great. And why is that important to you that a group of people like us would commit money and effort to do something like that?
Well, it's important to me and that our church does it because it preserves the finite beauty of the earth, whether that be tiny ostracods in the Caribbean or the green growing trees in Camp Adams. Just adding solar panels to our community will reduce our carbon footprint significantly and allow us to be a part of the solution to our climate change crisis instead of continuing to be a part of the problem.
Well, Christina, I appreciate that your idea and your braveness to share it with us as a whole congregation as well. Certainly worthy of us considering as we move into the future and consider what it would mean to be a post-pandemic church. Obviously, a lot of details would have to be worked out if that plan were ever developed, financially and all those things. But I think what your idea really helps me frame it within myself is to start thinking outside the box, to really be looking at how can we be part of the, like as you say, part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. How can we be imaginal cells, especially as we consider how we will emerge past the pandemic to do more good in the world and to make this world a truly better place. Thanks for sharing, Christina.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's. I want to close just simply by offering that invitation to you. Is that while we take between now and Easter, it's Lent, and part of our Lenten discipline is to just imagine what the church can be when we emerge from the pandemic. What hopes and dreams do you have to make our community, our congregation, and even the world a better place? If you could just think outside the box and not be constrained by whatever has happened in the past or not happened in the past, and simply imagine. Simply imagine. I suspect we'll be having a lot of conversations about how we emerge, especially post-Easter. So let's be those imaginal cells between now and then.